Hello and welcome to Robinson Hall Experts Talk. Today is the 12th of November and we are going to be talking about the budget. I have Andrew Capel with me. He's the Senior Partner and Head of Land Agency. Andrew has worked for Robinson Hall for over 35 years and provides expertise on all aspects of rural land management. I also have Andrew Jenkinson. Andrew is Partner and Rural Surveyor. He has been part of Robinson Hall for many years. He specialises in development and gives advice to farming estates on a range of matters. So welcome, Andrew and Andrew.
Thank you, Laura.
First things first, the budget was announced on the 30th of October. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, Laura, this is the first budget put in place by the new Labour administration and is set to have the highest tax take for many decades. It certainly has a very significant impact on business, but perhaps a greater impact on rural business and family farming communities in particular.
Okay, so from the changes announced, what are the considerations that farmers and landowners should need to think about?
Well, there's quite a multitude, but I'll start off with inheritance tax. The first thing to note is that the nil rate bands, which each individual enjoys, have remained at their current levels. So that's 325,000 nil rate band, and with a further 175,000 nil rate band for residential extension. By the time those rates come to an end in 2030, they will have been the same for 21 years. So that is a very significant drag given inflation within that time. However, there's far more significant impact for farmers and landowners on inheritance tax. Just one initial positive is that there is an environmental extension to agricultural property relief for land that is included within environmental schemes from April 2025. This was mooted by the previous government, but was one of the things that got lost in the period when Parliament was foreshortened, so dropped. And I must say we're very pleased to see that particular element back because it provides certainty for those who are looking to go into longer term environmental schemes as the government encourages. However, there are other elements of inheritance tax which are less welcome and certainly more impactful for farmers and landowners, and that is the changes proposed to agricultural property relief and business property relief. And for the first time in nearly 40 years, agricultural and business property will come within the inheritance tax regime. So those assets will fall to be subject to tax at 40%, but there is a 50% relief, which basically means that the effective rate of tax to be paid will be 20%.
Okay.
However, it does mean that for farmers, landowners, those business assets which typically used within their business, which would be machinery, livestock, growing crops, crops in store, other dead stocks, fertiliser, feedstuffs and so on, will all fall to be taxed. Livestock, hay, straw, silage and so on will all fall to be assessed and valued on their death, and they'll be potentially paying a 20% tax charge on those things. Each individual owner will have a £1 million allowance. So if you're a sole trader and you hold all those assets yourself, then on a typical farm, if there is such a thing, that £1 million allowance won't go very far. If perhaps there's a farmer holding with his spouse, and they're both owners of the business, then they'll have £1 million each. So that might be a little bit better. But again, on a typical farm that we see with our client base, even a £2 million allowance won't go very far.
No.
The nasty elements within that, even more nasty perhaps, are some of the valuation issues that may well come out of what is defined to be a business asset, which we haven't really had to consider because of the 100% relief that's been available to date. But I think we will see far more focus on perhaps agricultural buildings, where people have renewed milking parlours, grain stores, refrigeration units on cold stores and things like that. Those will be treated as being business assets, and they will be subject to tax. The other element that will also fall within the business assets will be tenancies, whether they're the old style Agricultural Holdings Act 1986 tenancies or farm business tenancies available since 1995, where the individual who sadly passed away had a tenant's interest in those at the time of their death, then the value of that tenancy will fall to be assessed as a business asset and therefore subject to 20% tax rate.
Gosh, so it covers a lot.
It's very wide reaching, and typically those assets to date would have received 100% relief under business property relief, but not after the 6th of April 2026.
As Andrew says, the valuation of these assets is going to become much more important, where land has got potential hope value, and many clients might regard it as worth little more than agricultural value. Suddenly the district valuer could be looking to argue a significant increase, and therefore, whilst they may think it's worth, say, £10,000 to £12,000 an acre, the district valuer may look to say that it's worth £30,000, £40,000, £50,000 an acre, which obviously affects the tax paid significantly.
Yeah.
And we've seen that to date on not only on strategic land with hope value, where the agricultural property relief has been available on the agricultural value of agricultural assets. So therefore the hope value element would not fall under agricultural property relief, but it would fall under business property relief. So to date, if a farmer landowner had a parcel of land on the edge of a village which they felt had hope value, and that might be, its market value might be £25,000 per acre, but its agricultural value might be only 10, they'd gain a business property relief on the £15,000 over and above its agricultural value. So one way or the other, they would pay no tax.
Yeah.
But as Andrew has pointed out, under the proposals from April 2026, the whole of that value will be subject to tax, and that will be a tax payable when actually people haven't realised that potential hope gain, so therefore might not have the money available to pay it.
It's going to make planning significantly difficult, because it will be a changing situation all of the time. One of the other changes proposed in the budget to come in the following year, in April 2027, was the pensions will now become within the inheritance tax regime. Again, they have not been taxed for a very long time and will catch many people. It's predicted that the pension relief removal will raise double the amount that the changes to APR and BPR will raise, so it's very significant.
Yes, I mean the amount that is forecast by the Treasury to be raised from the changes to agricultural and business property relief is £500 million, which is a very small figure in the overall budget of central government.
But well, I think Andrew, our feeling though is that actually is a massive underestimate for once, in that actually far more people are going to be caught by the changes to BPR and APR than the government realise, because they're using potentially incorrect data. The figure they keep quoting of the APR change only affecting 500 farmers is only looking at those that claim APR relief, and tends to be actually the lifestyle buyer with a paddock or two next to their house. They haven't given any figures, as far as I've seen, about the effect of the removal of BPR, but that will be by far the bigger impact than the removal of APR, which to date seems to have got most of the press. It's worth pointing out also though that there's quite a lot else in that budget, not just inheritance tax, that was raised. Minimum wage, published the day before, has had a significant increase. We've got the increase in the national employers' contribution, the employers' national insurance contribution to 15%, and the lowering of the threshold so that it will catch more seasonal labour. There was no changes again to many of the income tax thresholds, so more people will be caught, just like they were with inheritance tax, as Andrew was explaining earlier, through the inflationary drag. And then there's smaller things that have got some of the farming press, such as the double cab pickups, which going forward will be treated as a company car rather than a company van, which is a significant income tax effect to the employee. There is the significant reduction in PPS, where from 2025 the maximum payment to anyone will be £7,200 per annum, which for many clients they were expecting a figure of closer to 50,000. So there's a huge change, and that income can't be replaced. There's no way to replace that. So that is straight profit loss moving forward. Those are the changes that are in some ways worrying the banks more than potential inheritance tax, because those are the changes that they see now.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider there. I think a lot of people these days also go on social media, and there's a lot of hype and advice on social media at the moment. Should everything that our listeners read take it literally? What's your stance?
It's the joys of social media is that everyone becomes an expert. There have been some interesting comments on social media, often ill-informed, and what farmers and landowners need to be thinking about is their own individual circumstances. Many of the comments that have been made are talking about people's own individual circumstances or peddling in completely incorrect advice. So the focus very much needs to be about your business and what's within your control to change. And I would tend to ignore everything on social media.
I think that's good advice. In regards to that, what advice would you give to those who are not sure where to start? As you've already alluded to, there's a lot to consider. When it comes to trying to reduce a potential hefty tax bill, what advice are we giving?
Well, there's a number of places that people could start, Laura. I think they, first of all, need to consider what their assets are and what potential value they may have, and be realistic about those values, because with our client base, livestock and arable farmers, they tend to have large fleets of machinery, and the price of machinery actually in recent years has become stronger because the cost of new machinery has gone up, so therefore people have retained perhaps machinery longer, but actually second-hand values have gone up as well. And whereas before, on death, that machinery would have gone through the written down value on the books, now that will no longer be the case, it will be at market value. So don't be unrealistic about what assets you have standing around in your yard and workshop, but also look at the other elements of value that you have. We mentioned earlier on about growing crops. I mean, where we're doing stock taking valuations and we're including growing crops, we're doing that on a basis approved by the revenue, and the same with livestock. There are pre-agreed percentages for homebred livestock, for example, but those on death, it will be market value, not the deemed cost value. So that could be something very different.
Yeah.
And if people merely look at what their livestock value was in their most recent stock taking valuation, that won't be its market value, because it's a different method as agreed with the revenue. So I think people should start with that. They should then consider who else is involved in their business, family, other family members perhaps. They could consider perhaps splitting the ownership so that there are more £1 million relief levels to go around. They could consider gifting as well, down to perhaps the next generation within the family. But I would caution a little bit there, because often in these family situations there's always the terrible spectre of divorce, and we've seen instances where people have gifted down, and for whatever reason divorce has happened within the family, and they have lost a proportion of their value
because of gifting it.
Because of that. So people might like to consider arrangements in order to protect against that situation should that happen. I suspect we might also see the return, perhaps, of the putting in place tenancies, longer-term tenancies, to erode value. They are a two-edged sword. We still see plenty of the residue of these from the 1970s and 1980s, and I can't say that they've always served the families who put them in place terribly well, because at times, as the ownership becomes more fragmented through a different generation, they perhaps act as a little bit of a bar on reinvestment within the holding, but they may well impact value, and therefore they may well reduce tax, but they do come at a price in terms of flexibility in your business and how you might manage it going forward.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. That's really useful. So what are the key considerations people should think about now then? So
these are only proposed changes. They're subject to a consultation next spring, with a view of bringing them in April 2026. There's also obviously been significant backlash from the community, and we'll have to see what lobbying does to these changes. So for the majority of the clients, rushing into decisions now will be wrong. As Andrew says, making a list of assets and being honest with the valuations of those assets is a useful place to start, and it can be done now. Thinking about your family situation and your business situation it should also be considered now, and potentially discussing succession planning is something that should always be happening in any business. For the majority of the clients, I don't think we will be making huge changes until post the consultation. Where we are looking to make changes now are normally driven by two things: either the age of the client, or where we think there will be a significant change in value. So where clients have got land being promoted for development, which is currently not within a local plan, but may be coming forward, by waiting 2 years to make the transfer, that means that there's an additional 2 years on the 7-year clock that needs to be survived for, but also there may be the ability to transfer land as a lower value now than in a few years' time.
Okay.
So looking at what you can control now, but not rushing into things, will be the key message.
That sounds like a good idea. Is there anything that has been missed by the media?
I think, as I said earlier, the focus has been very much on inheritance tax and the proposed changes. It's the cumulative effect of all these changes that needs to be considered by businesses. The loss of the BPS income, which is far quicker than expected, the potential taxing of pensions, the extra costs of employing people. These all need to be factored into budgets and cash flows, which tend to be done at this time of year. And a fundamental look at the farm's profitability with these changes needs to be carefully considered. With poor commodity prices currently and high costs, including machinery, some hard conversations need to be had about whether your business is performing to its maximum and what changes may be beneficial.
Do you have anything to add, Andrew?
I think the point that Andrew makes on BPS is absolutely right. I mean, there's another nasty element in there, which is the carbon borders tax on fertiliser, where the rate is not entirely, well, it's not fixed at the moment, but the thinking seems to be it's going to be somewhere £50 to £75 per tonne on imported fertiliser, which is clearly unwelcome for UK agriculture, where potentially those measures are going to be put in place in Europe, but at a later date. So they won't be suffering that additional cost, whereas the UK will from the outset, and that potentially makes UK crop look less attractive than imported, which is perhaps against what the government is seeking to do in guaranteeing food security in the UK.
Yeah.
Those changes are proposed from 2027.
Yes, correct. Yes.
So
they're not immediate, but that's the direction of travel, and that was something that came out in the Treasury papers around the budget.
Okay, thank you. So, how can Robinson Hall help anyone that's listening and they're thinking, God, where to start?
Well, as I said earlier, perhaps we can help with consideration of current values of assets.
Yeah.
And then stand back perhaps with other advisors in the team, maybe accountants and solicitors, to try and formulate a plan for each family, because this is not a one-size-fits-all situation. Every family circumstance will be different, and it will need careful consideration to arrive at the right answer, and that may well involve some elements that people will find particularly difficult.
Yeah.
In terms of what they keep or retain, or how they feel they should move their business forward.
So we can almost be a mediator to kind of help those conversations happen and come up with a plan.
Well, we're often involved in arrangements between the different generations of farming families in order to facilitate change and make sure that goes as smoothly as it can.
Yeah.
And I think that these measures will make people focus on their business at an earlier stage, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other points you'd like to make before we conclude?
we've been asked already numerous times, what's this going to do to land prices? My personal view is I don't see that this dramatically affects the land market in our area. I can see in areas which are perhaps less driven by external factors and more driven by agricultural output, that it may have an effect. But in the core central belt of the countryside, there's still so many other demands on land: solar, wind, development, equestrian. All of these will continue, in my view, to support the land market. That's not even including the potential requirements of the conservation covenants and P&G that continues to gradually expand, with charities looking at buying large areas of land in order to use for biodiversity net gain or carbon credits in the future.
Yes, I would agree with Andrew. I don't really see there's going to be a wholesale crash in land values in our patch. Yes, perhaps in some of the more purely rural areas there may be, but there are still good reasons to own land. And although the changes in inheritance tax are unwelcome, obviously if you do have a large amount of money in the bank and you are looking to invest it, land will get 50% relief. So rather than if you die with that money in the bank, you'll be paying a higher rate than if you actually have invested it in land.
As I said, if these changes come in, and obviously it still is a big if, the majority of parklands still won't be looking at selling land. They'll be looking at selling the other assets, the cottages, the pony paddocks, etc. I don't see that this will bring wholesale change in terms of the land market. The commentators who are suggesting this perhaps have a vested interest in being selling agents.
Possibly, yeah. Could hit the nail on the head there, Andrew.
But I think that, as we said at a number of points, I think it's important for people to seek advice in order that they arrive at the best solution for them and their families, and not make a knee-jerk reaction to what they've read in the press or read on social media. Andrew mentioned the ongoing lobbying, which is very active in this area at present, and I would urge people to contact their MP to tell them what their views are and how it might impact their business and their family going forward, in order that they are fully aware.
As Andrew says, succession planning takes time. It should always be under review anyway. Best decisions are normally made with time in your hands. We've got this date of April 2026. It will come round relatively quickly, so it's not something to be ignored, but also nothing should be jumped into, apart from in a few special circumstances.
I think that's key, really, as both Andrews have said. It's important to consider your assets and the best way forward. With doing that, I'd recommend involving professionals at the very start. We can help you from start to finish. We have experts in valuation, succession planning, looking at the bigger picture and moving forward, and we will happily work with other professionals such as accountants and tax advisors. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. Andrew Capel and Andrew Jenkinson's contact details can be found on the Meet the Team page on our website. Thank you ever so much, Andrews, for your time today.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
I will be launching a range of other podcasts in the future. I've launched 11 to date, full of a range of topics, so please have a listen to them. They're available on our podcast page on our website, also the key podcast channels such as Spotify and Apple Music. If you have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you all stay tuned next time. Many thanks. Goodbye. Our podcasts are for informational purposes only and should not be considered as legal advice. We are not responsible for any losses, damages or liabilities that may arise. The advice and views are from the expert only.